Hi there, my name is Cal Evans, and I am here work with my good friend, Mr. Chris Cornutt. Say hi to everybody, Chris.
Hello.
And we're going to talk today about changing careers. Chris and I have known each other for, oh God, Chris, 15, 20 years. It's
Oh,
going
at
on it.
least, yeah.
Yeah. Back my very first time at Zend, you were one of the first community people. And I think you and Ben Ramsey were the first people I ever met. So we've known each other for a while. And when we met, you were doing just PHP programming. But I
Mhm.
watched, it hit me one year at Tech that you were starting to focus on security more and talking more about that. And your talks focus more on that and less on the PHP coding itself. So I thought it might be interesting. And then, of course, I've watched you move whole hog away from programming into the security space. So I thought it might be interesting to bring you on so you can talk to other developers that are considering changing career paths and give them the benefit of your experience. So I guess the very first question is why? Why'd you make the switch into security?
Um, Honestly, I guess I'd gotten to a certain point in my career that, I guess at that point, I'd been doing PHP development strictly for maybe 12, 13 years. And I got to a certain point where I kind of felt like I was plateauing a little bit.
Mhm.
There was always new stuff to learn, obviously, and new technology to mess with and all that. But after a while, it just kind of, you start going through those cycles. It's like, oh, new technology, I'm going to go learn about it. Okay, I'm done with learning about it, and so it just kind of cycles over and over again. But I'd always had an interest in security, and I thought, I think this would be a really interesting way to kind of pivot my career,
Mhm.
because the aspect that I went into was application security. So it's not that much different. You're still in the code. You're still, working with other engineers and everything. It's just a little bit different perspective because you're really focusing more on that security aspect of it. And some of the talks that you were mentioning earlier, where I was at PHP conferences or at technology conferences talking about security,
Mhm.
always had that same kind of focus. So that it was just kind of like a natural kind of segue into it. And now, like you said, I'm full on the security side, a little bit different kind of role these days.
Now, these days, you just made the jump to GitHub, at least as
Hmm.
as of this recording. You're now working with GitHub, so you've moved. You were with Duo there for a while, which I love their
Yep.
product, and you're now with GitHub, which I use their product. No, so but I'm seeing this is obviously not just a phase you were going through. This is the career, the path that you've now chosen.
Hmm.
So what does your role now entail? I mean, I know as a PHP developer, I know what that entails, but now what are you working on?
So, I mentioned that I, went from the development aspect to the application security side of things, where it was super high tech and everything.
Mhm.
Um, More involved in the actual code and everything like that. But then I kind of decided, hey, I miss some of the teaching. I miss some of the instruction. I miss, sharing knowledge, basically. And so even in my previous role, I migrated more towards kind of a security education role, and not so much on the high tech, high touch code, living in the code every day.
Mhm.
And so that's what I'm doing at GitHub as well. The team that I'm on, it's actually the security partners team.
Hmm.
We're focusing on, internal training, potentially external training. Um, really trying to grow the security organization's role inside of the larger GitHub organization. Reducing that friction level between the other security teams and the engineering staff. So, we're still kind of feeling it out a little bit about what it's all going to entail, but it's still, again, on the educational side, the instructional side, to really broaden the knowledge, and share as much knowledge as we can with the rest of the organization from obviously the security aspect.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about making the move, and you're right. At some point, developers get into the grind of there's new technology, learn to new technology. People like you and me, there's also the write a talk on the new technology, present the talk at a
Yeah,
conference, you know.
yeah.
But when you started doing this, was this I'm going to do security, or was this more of a gradual awakening to the fact that you needed to change and security seemed to be the interesting point?
So it was a little more of a gradual thing. Like I said, I'd always kind of had an interest in the security aspect of development. I didn't really get to pursue it very much early on. And then as my career started really, snowballing, it was just more focused on the high tech, side of things.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it was a very conscious decision on my part to really make that pivot in my career. Like I said, it still was the high tech kind of side of things whenever I did make that transition. So it wasn't a huge shock. It wasn't like I was, going into network security or, physical security or anything like that, where it was just completely different. So, I carried over some of that knowledge. It was nice to be able to talk to the engineering staff and to be able to say, oh, well, have you thought about this? Because I had the familiarity with the development side, with, the architecture side of applications. So it wasn't like, somebody coming in to, from the security side that had no programming knowledge and trying to make recommendations, on application security. So it was nice to have that background and kind of carry that forward with me.
Very interesting. Now, once you started the snowball rolling down the hill, about how long did it take for you to go from I am a full-time programmer to I am now a application security programmer?
Let's see. That was probably about a year and a half, something like that.
Mhm.
There was a role that I got over at HP that was it was still doing programming, but it was in the security group, and so it was more focused on the security aspect of things.
Mhm.
And then I ended up migrating from there to Salesforce, where that was my first like official application security role.
Mhm.
That team was kind of an interesting balance. We were still doing some development, like a little bit of development on the code base, creating tools that could help improve the security, making security patches for the applications that were running. But then there was the application security side where we did security assessments, we did, architecture reviews. And then as I moved on to Duo/Cisco, it was more about the full-on application security, and then it's kind of migrated a little bit from there.
Hmm. Now, did you, from a practical standpoint, did you go to your employer, your boss at the time, and say, "I'm making the move," or did you know that you were not going to stay where you were and go and look for something in the field?
So I was thinking about making the move at the job that I was currently at. So I thought, hey, I'm going to start learning about this. I'm going to start reading up as much as possible. I had a baseline of knowledge. I knew enough to know that there was a lot that I didn't know. And so I immediately started doing research. I started to, try to listen to talks on YouTube and really understand what it meant to apply this stuff, in the development context.
Mhm.
So it wasn't just, oh, I read in a book about cross-site scripting, so now I'm an expert. We need to know how that usually shows up in applications and what we do to fix it. Um, and so after I got to a certain point, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And so I actually looked for roles, application security roles, that I could move into. And at the time, it was just kind of a natural flow. It wasn't one of those things where I walked into my boss and I said, "See ya, I'm gonna go do this job." It was just, it was time to move on from that particular role anyway.
Okay.
And so it worked out as kind of a natural flow.
Now, a lot of people that are looking at making a change like this are worried about salaries and benefits and titles and things like that. When you
Hmm.
took your first application security job, by the way, I had no idea that you weren't doing network security or something. I just knew you were doing security, and
Security
that's
things.
just
Yeah.
nebulous,
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but did you? A lot of people are worried about, taking a hit career wise. Did you
Mhm.
take a pay cut? Did you take a lower position to get into the field and then work your way back up?
I did. So on the development side, I ended up getting up to like team lead. I was even a manager for a little while, which was
Mhm.
an interesting, interesting period of my career.
I remember those
Um,
days.
yeah, yeah, that was seems like forever ago. Um, but um, but yeah, whenever I did jump down or jump into the application security world, it was starting out as a application security engineer, which is basically essentially the same as like a junior to mid-range
Hmm.
developer.
Okay.
And so, fortunately, the pay was pretty similar, because the pay on the development side is pretty high for most folks, for the average role on that side. And fortunately, the security world is pretty similar. There's a super big demand for people on both sides of the,
Mhm.
the programming and the security side, and so they have to keep things really competitive. And being able to find people that have that development background that want to come over into security is even a little bit more difficult. There's a lot of security folks out there that that's what they started in. They went to school and they got a degree doing information security or something like that, and they may have toyed around with development and some programming in that time, but they didn't have that deep knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to carry over that knowledge and have it be relatively comparable. And then slowly over time I moved up to the senior level, and now kind of helping to lead some of the stuff on my team at GitHub. There's two of us, so so we're both leading different initiatives and different efforts, but yeah, I mean there's growth, and there's potential for even further growth too.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. When I spent an entire quarter in college studying for computer programming before I realized college was not for me. But we did have a security class. But the
Yeah.
security class taught us to lock the cards up in the punch cards up in the safe. That was
Yep.
security when I was learning programming. So,
Yep.
uh, so it sounds like you took a step down, but it was like one step back to go two step forwards.
Mhm.
Do you feel like that this has set your career back by making this move?
No, not really. I mean, it's obviously, since it's a different kind of atmosphere,
Mhm.
there are still things that I feel like I'm still catching up on in the security world. Like there's a lot of things like I knew the technology, I knew the code, I knew how to, what the exploits were, how to mitigate them, everything like that. But then when you come into an environment where everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of the people have been doing security related things for 20, 30 years. There's just some built-in knowledge on that side of the industry
Mm.
that, coming into it brand new, basically, you just don't have. And so there are some aspects that I feel like I'm kind of still catching up on, even though I guess my first application security job was 6 years ago, 7 years
Wow.
ago was when I
Yeah.
started at it. And so, it's still a little bit of catch up, but it's not always about the technology side of things. Like a lot of times you can kind of catch on to that stuff. It's more about the community, the general atmosphere. I've attended a couple of security conferences since I've made the move over. And they are quite a bit different from programming conferences, I will say. Just the whole mood. Now, I haven't made it to DEF CON or Black Hat or anything like that, which is like way on the other side, way far
Yeah.
away. Um, but I hope to one day. So, it's
I want to talk about that
and
for just a minute because
oh
conferences,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I love conferences. This has absolutely nothing to do with the topic. It's just something interesting to me.
yeah.
You know me, I love conferences. I've run them, I have hosted them, and I've spoken at more than I can remember. The conferences that I go to, and the ones that you and I used to go to all the time, are very community oriented,
Hmm.
and it really didn't matter who was there. It was all just a bunch of friends getting together and talking, you know.
Right, right.
How are the security conferences different? I mean, suit and tie, less drinking, what?
Oh, no, the drinking is about the same. Um,
Oh dear God.
yeah, yeah. If not worse in some places.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah.
hey, they used to say that the biggest line item at ZenCon was Cal's bar tab. So,
Yes, yes. Having been there and participated in a little bit of that, yes, I can understand. No, the general atmosphere, I mean, it depends. So it was kind of the same kind of thing with, ZenCon versus the community conferences on the PHP
okay,
side, right?
yeah.
So ZenCon was a little more formal, it was still casual,
No, I get that. Yeah.
um, but the community conferences were definitely, hey, let's get together and hang out, and oh, maybe there's some talks involved.
Yeah.
The on the security side, there it's pretty much the same, really. The local conferences, like I attended the last con conference that was in Austin. It was very much a regional conference.
Mhm.
I spoke there once or twice. But then I also spoke at the AppSec USA conference, which is a really big one put on by the OWASP group,
Mhm.
and a couple other sponsoring companies and
Yeah.
stuff. That one, yes, people did show up in dress shirts and ties and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a little bit more on the formal side.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends on your speed and your preference. Like I said, like on the development side, there's a range of conferences that you can attend, just depending on what you want to do.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Um, hey, okay, you didn't set your career back any significant amount. You're obviously making progress now, and you're back on track. Um, Now that you're on your third or fourth security position,
Yeah.
um, do you feel good about having made the move? Looking back, would you still do the same thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I felt like I had hit a certain point in what I was doing before.
Mhm.
And, knowing that now that once I made that move, that the growth that has happened since then, has really enhanced, my personal satisfaction, I suppose.
Mhm.
In what I'm doing these days. And I feel like if I had stayed doing what I was doing before, I just wouldn't be at that place, right now.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think, if I had made the move over to security, it would have been something else by now. I would have figured out something else to pivot into that, would have allowed me that personal level of growth, both in my career and personally, and just enjoy it really.
Yeah. Well, I actually pivoted about 2 years before we met. Up till that point, I had just been heads down programmer. That was all I did.
Hmm.
And Devisser over at Zen said, "Hey, you want to do community?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, sure, why not?" I wish I could say that I thought it out and made the conscious decision. But in honesty, I was between jobs, and he offered me a good salary, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I guess I can do that. So,
Yep.
but little did I know that my career was going to take a left turn at that point. And I
Oh
still
yeah.
do coding, but I'm blessed to be able to spend a lot of time doing stuff like this and
Hmm.
podcasts and things like that. Hey, last two questions. We're going to wrap it
Okay.
up. What do you wish you had known before you made the jump?
That is a really good question. I think I would probably, and this is a little bit more on the knowledge side, I guess. I would have liked to have come into it a little bit more knowledgeable about the general community on the security side, a little bit more about the application of the knowledge.
Mhm.
Because when I first shifted over, it was like I said, it was like, this is what cross-site scripting is. This is how you fix it. But getting in there and actually finding it in an application, and then trying to figure out, because any sufficiently large application is going to be complicated, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing, if it's been around for a couple of years, it's going to be a huge code base, regardless of how hard you try to keep it small and keep it optimized. Always happens. And so to be able to go in there and actually say, okay, I know that there's a problem here. I have a SQL injection problem. Let me go through and try to figure out how to trace this down. Let me go through and figure out how I can test it to make sure that the bug is actually fixed. How do I document this correctly? There's all sorts of this kind of meta things outside of just the technology itself. And I think, if I had spent a little bit more time focusing on some of that versus just the technology side, it would have been a little bit easier. But again, that's not something you can't learn. That's kind of the key with something like this when you do make a transition. Whether it's huge or whether it's kind of similar to what you're doing, you have to keep learning. It's not one of those things where I was like, okay, now I'm an AppSec engineer and I can stop learning. You just have to keep going, and there's always something, regardless of what industry you're in. There's always more to know. So
That's true. Okay, final question. There are developers out there that are considering some kind of move, whether it's this or fast food service or whatnot. What advice would you have to developers who are looking to either switch roles or switch fields? Let's say within technology. Let's not go to fast food. So.
Oh, okay. All right. I was going to say, learn how to flip a burger. I don't know. No, I think, honestly, the biggest piece of advice is kind of what I ended that last one on is always approach things, and really try to learn as much as you can about them, right? Most developers that I know, they did the same thing on that side. They sat and they tinkered with code. They messed with different frameworks and learned about new things. A lot of the people I know on the PHP side, they started out as back-end developers. Some of them migrated full front end. So it's still in the programming world. But you kind of migrate over and you have to keep learning as you're doing it. There's so many new technologies. There's so many new products that are out there. And that's kind of one of the things that I've done lately with more of the move a little bit more back into instruction and teaching and training and everything. I actually went back to grad school and got a certificate in instructional design.
Nice.
So that I could really get the solid background in that. Now it's not like a full master's or anything like that, but I wanted that background so that I could really take that and apply it to what I'm currently doing. So that I can really understand the principles behind what makes a good training. How to figure out a good curriculum plan. All that kind of stuff. I wanted to learn that stuff. And so keeping an active and open mind and really trying to just absorb as much as possible really goes a long way.
That is fantastic advice. I do appreciate that. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for taking time away from Github and all the security issues they have. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to talk with us. I really do appreciate it. And it's great just catching up with you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. It's been too long.
It really has. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this series. And hey, if you have enjoyed this, do me a favor, contact Gun.io and let them know you enjoyed this, okay? That way they let me keep doing them. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.